welcome to Mural Imagine. I am your host for today's session, Haley Temple, and we're so delighted to have all of you here with our special guest today, who I'll introduce in a moment. But Mural Imagine is really all about bringing different perspectives from our customers to help inspire you and think about how you can bring visual and digital collaboration into your work. So whether you are an experienced facilitator or you're just trying to solve that complex problem, we are going to help give you some inspiration and even some methods that you can use and bring back into your own work. And today I am so delighted to have Eugene Chung, who's joining us to share his story about how he was bringing his teams together, of course, during this crazy time that we have in the world right now. And Eugene, welcome. How are you?
I am awesome today. Thank you so much for
Yay.
having me.
Yeah, so glad to have you. And Eugene, I love, by the way, the role that you have at Atlassian, which is, if I have it correct, you are responsible for kind of coaching and advising teams in your research and development space around how to be an awesome team and how to work together and providing that one-on-one coaching anywhere from just software engineers all the way up through leadership. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We like to think about it as just helping our teams continuously improve across the R&D org. So the R&D org is essentially at Atlassian, any of our teams, product platform teams that work on delivering our software to our customers. So it's about 2,500 people across the world, Sydney, the States, Bangalore, a lot of different offices. And our job is really to help two things. I guess number one is help improve the larger system in which those teams operate. But then the second thing is actually on the ground coaching, as you mentioned.
Great. So I think some of the advice and of course the play that you're going to share with us today will be immensely applicable and helpful to a lot of people who are on the call today. And what I want to invite those of you in the audience to do is follow along with us on the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to put that into the Q&A panel in Zoom. It's probably at the bottom of your screen. And what we're going to be doing is collecting those questions and saving about 15 minutes at the end of our time for Eugene and I and other members of the Mural team to answer questions. And then go ahead and share some of your tips or best practices and stuff in the chat, because this is really a space for you guys to connect and learn too. So with that, Eugene, let's dive into the details. So I know you, like many of people using Mural who are on this call today, had an unexpected turn of events when we had to work remote. And I'd love to know, well, yeah, of course, what was that challenge
Mm.
and yeah, what are you going to talk about today?
Yeah, I think even more so, obviously everyone went through this dramatic shift to remote working, whether it was around like February, March, or April. Specifically for us in Sydney, it was right at the beginning, right in the middle of March, and that was actually the first week that I joined Atlassian when Atlassian completely shifted to fully remote working. So I had the challenge and the opportunity to fully on board at Atlassian during that time. I actually still haven't been to headquarters, even though it's a few kilometers away. Still haven't been able to make it into the office. So, I think at that time, a lot of things shifted for all of us. And for us specifically at Atlassian, we kind of observed over those first couple of months was we tried to just keep going as usual, right? Try to like pick things up as if things hadn't changed, whether that was adding more hours to our day or just trying to work harder. A lot of it was also just trying to avoid thinking about everything that was happening around us and allowing that the anxiety and nervousness of everything that was happening to actually seep into our lives. I think that's a dramatic shift that's happened. Now it's like pre-COVID, there was this harder line and separation between your work life and your home life and your personal life, or you at least had the ability to make that choice, right? It's like the choice is yours to say, well, I'm going to compartmentalize and put my home life into this box, and then when I go to work, then I'm someone completely new. I can choose a new identity, or I can think about different things and focus on different things. But I think now, and Atlassian actually commissioned this really large longitudinal global study on the onset of COVID-19 to understand what the impacts were of this dramatic shift to remote working. How is it affecting not just work? And I think that's important too. But how is it affecting us as humans? And how does it affect how we relate to each other? And what do we need to be able to actually cope with this dramatic change and the shift that's happening all around us? And as part of that, what we learned was that, in post COVID-19 land, like we can't necessarily draw those boundaries as hard as we were able to before. I can definitely attest to that as someone who works out of my own bedroom, sometimes with my wife, who's also an Atlassian, and the two of us are working, out of our own bedroom, and it's harder to draw those lines of like, yeah, this is my work life and this is my home life. I literally cannot separate, those two lines, and I think that's something that a lot of us, especially now that we're like 7 months in to this transition, are now starting to realize that this is actually not an aberration and that we're not going to go back to how things used to be. Like this is, yes, something that's actually here to stay and something that we just actually have to adapt and prepare, specifically in my role as a team coach, prepare our teams and our organizations to be able to, yes, like be more resilient, but be more adaptive to be able to cope with that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely understand the dynamic there because my fiance and I are literally facing back to back or face to face right now, but our desks are facing each other. And it's like, how do you navigate and manage that relationship, both with your home life and then thinking about connecting with your team? Now, I think no matter what organization you're part of, you can definitely understand the challenges of getting to and navigating that new space. What now you said you've never been to headquarters, even though it's pretty close to where you're working. Can you give a brief overview of for those who might not know Atlassian, I love Atlassian. We use Atlassian tools all the time, but what was Atlassian like before, and how was it working at Atlassian before then? I know you just joined, but what was the
Mhm.
environment you were coming into, and also, was Mural and visual collaboration part of the practice before you started?
Yeah, so Atlassian as a whole is an organization of about 5,000 people worldwide, and it's growing very rapidly. And so each different office location has its own different vibe and own essentially way of working. Teams are pretty autonomous in terms of how they actually do the work. So they're able to use the tools and identify what they actually want to work from. And I can speak for Sydney specifically. A lot of the office in Sydney, which is our biggest location, uh, you know, was in the office. So we do have a lot of remote and fully distributed teams, but a lot of the ways of working were grounded in being able to actually work face to face or work side by side and be able to physically collaborate with each other. And so when we shifted to more remote working, something like a mural, the ability to try to get as close as you can to that experience, but at the end of the day, yeah, it may not be exactly the same. But trying to maintain those elements of like visual, auditory, and like kinesthetic types of collaboration, really important. Like to be able to bring people together and effectively collaborate with each other remotely.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I would love to ask our audience too, if you can add in the chat, you mentioned some of these collaborative challenges. For our audience, what have some of the challenges been for you guys working together with your teams? So maybe you were like the Atlassian team working in the office side by side, and now you're remote. What have some of those challenges been? And I'm curious to see if maybe you can offer some advice or things like that at the end during the Q&A. But as those answers are coming in, so we have kind of an understanding of, and thank you for sharing. So Atlassian was a very autonomous team, kind of different individual cultures, but also a global company. So you're in Australia, but you're working with thousands of people around the world. So how did your team go about thinking through kind of this remote work
Mm,
impact and the work life impact and making what we're going to talk about today, which is this play? And well, first of all,
mm.
what is a play? And how did your team go about solving and making one?
Yeah, I think the way that our team attacked it was in a couple of ways. I think number one, we focus a lot on just getting the right tools and the right templates to our teams and being able to equip them with what they need to try to reduce the cognitive load on our teams to be able to create these things for themselves and almost make it easier for them to whether it's run plays or do different practices to advance their teams remotely. So I think that was number one. It's like the practical stuff. And I think
Mhm.
that's what we immediately jump to is like, oh, well, are we set up from a tool perspective, from a systems perspective, from a template perspective? But I
Hmm.
think the more important thing is actually focusing on these like almost new and emerging skills and competencies that we need to more effectively work remotely and work during this time, especially in this year of 2020. And I think these new skills aren't necessarily things that tools can give you or that systems can give you. These skills of like true empathy, of being able to understand each other, being able to adapt with each other, and like really get to this point where you have this like deeper sense of trust and connection with your team. This is resilience
Hmm.
on teams. Like those are the skills that we're trying to build up now. And so previously in the first few months of the pandemic, it was like, okay, let's rapidly get up as many templates and tools as we can. And now it's like, well, that human sense of competency is what we're focusing on trying to build up. And so like now that we're transitioning to remote work, I think that was the opportunity that we saw was that, the answer to this, like, how might we help teams manage work-life impact? It was actually by focusing on more of those new skills, the new skills of empathy and building understanding with each other. So in order to do that, we saw an opportunity to create a new play to be able to meet that purpose. And for full context, the Atlassian Team Playbook is a publicly available, essentially a website, but it's 45 plus of our tried and true and tested plays that we use every day internally across Atlassian that we give away for free,
Hmm.
and they're all about improving teamwork and the effectiveness of teams. It's available for anyone to jump on, which is something that you can do after the session. But I think besides just plays being essentially like recipes for how to do something, I think I see plays being the secret weapon for behavior change. It's almost being able to give teams and leaders an easy way for people to try on new behaviors and ideally new things, new ways of doing things. We can, help them behave differently, yes, but also over time change their mindsets and how they approach it. So, I see
Yeah.
plays as a really important tool to be able to build up those new skills that I just talked about that teams need to be more effective in this remote context.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious that your team's working remote. You're trying to help your teams that you're working with, the R&D teams who are working remote. So, if you can, and the play that we're going to talk about is the Work Anywhere play. So, yeah, let's walk through a little bit what this play looked like, and in maybe also like the process that you guys use to prototype. We're going to show the prototypes in a moment, but how did your team do some prototyping
Yeah,
at a high
so
level?
yeah, when we're prototyping, again, it's not just about the template or the tool that we're creating, and I think that's probably the first takeaway for anyone on this call who's creating their own plays or their own templates. Yeah, the template is one part, and designing that really well is a good starting point. But
Mhm.
I do think it's about how these tools, the interactions around the tools, the conversations around those tools, and the larger environment. It's like how those things all come together to create a successful outcome. So like being able to prototype those three aspects, goes beyond just designing something in Mural. It's actually about, for us internally to get to the confidence that a play could actually be shared with not just internal teams but also external teams is, being able to look at all three of those things. And we call it, essentially dog fooding these
Mhm.
plays, but vigorously testing these plays with our internal teams to identify whether we're getting to a positive outcome and whether we have the confidence to be able to share this with other people. Like, are we solving the actual problem? Are we
Mhm.
getting to a good result? Are we doing harm? I think that was a huge concern, in all of this, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. But within this environment, we wouldn't want to create something that would lead to people feeling like they didn't have control or they didn't have their sense of privacy, right? So we didn't want to put people in more vulnerable positions than they already were, given everyone's already been in many vulnerable positions throughout this year.
Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack and like think about addressing too. And I'm like just reading through like what a lot of the challenges that you're highlighting. The audiences, and so Gabe said it's difficult onboarding a team and onboarding contractors. Reese said Zoom fatigue. Building those human competencies are challenging in a remote setting. Chatting with colleagues is and having that empathy and that experience. So what I'm going to do is why don't we jump into the process of prototyping
Yep.
And the prototypes that you built. And I'd love to have you walk us through that journey that you took. So with your team and kind of dog fooding the approach. So I'm looking at number one. I have Amal over here. So what was the intent behind this first prototype?
So I mentioned the global research that we did, and part of that research was kind of highlighting these three aspects of work-life impact. So essentially areas that we've been impacted by, and where you sit in these three different areas will essentially help you understand how you've been impacted and also how your teammates can best help you. So those areas are the idea of like your household, like where you work and what that looks like, your role, and also the quality of your network. So who are the people that you have access to support you? So I think we already had a basic premise of what mattered in this context and what we could actually build on. This first prototype, so I'll walk us through like essentially 4 prototypes and then walk through the final thing. And this is more just to share learnings and ways that we were able to identify what worked, what didn't work. So the first prototype was very early on, and the idea was that we're trying to solve for the problem of just creating more transparency and communicating how you've been affected by this change. And we made it very personal. So, what you see here is what we're calling essentially a Team Anywhere persona. But this is almost like a my user manual for the remote age. And on this profile, you could say like, hey, this is my name. These are my hours. This is what my home looks like. And just kind of talk about yourself, but also share where you sat around these 3 different areas, what you struggled with and what you need to be effective. And so this was the first version that we tested. And the idea was that you could use this profile or this persona and put it onto Confluence or share it on your Slack and essentially have anyone be able to see where you sat on these areas to get further visibility into what your situation was like. When we started testing this format, I think it became increasingly apparent that yes, something like this is really powerful, but people were very concerned about how this information was being used. So who am I sharing this information with? How is that information going to be used? Do I have control over who gets access to this information? Because yeah, I may want to share it with my teammates, but I don't want anyone within the organization to be able to see like what my household is like, and so started to realize like, yes, like these are deeply personal topics, and that sense of control, sense of privacy is really important. So that's a key learning that we took away, is to be able to give people that control and choice.
Nice. That absolutely, that's valid, especially thinking about different, privacy concerns and things like that across different teams and different attitudes about that, right? So, so your team kind of took this learning, dog fooded this approach, and how did that inform the second prototype? I'm just scanning over here to number 2, which,
Yeah.
huge difference. How did we get here?
Huge difference. So thinking about the learnings from the last time of like control, and also trying to keep the communication to a smaller radius, we thought about how could we actually just set up a workshop, so almost like a retro style format, being able to do this activity together, right? So we called it the Team Anywhere workshop. And as a team, you would go through those 3 different areas of like my work life at home, what does my role look like, and what does my community look like? What does my support network look like? And you would map it as a team. So everyone would get a blue dot on their own, and then you'd be able to map it together. And then we did kind of like a retro format of like, what are the things that help you be more effective in this area? What are the tensions? And be able to share that and have the conversation. So what was powerful about this retro format was like the team had really juicy conversations about what they were going through, what was working for them, what wasn't. But I think even though that conversation was very rich, there's a fair amount of social herding, essentially, of like essentially the team gravitating towards each other. So we started observing as over a few tests that we ran with this format, teams would cluster together and not necessarily want to represent their own self and their own unique situations, but they would put themselves essentially, like closer to the team. And we kind of saw that behavior of people like starting off in one area of the map and then kind of moving themselves to be closer to the team. So, as people were putting that down, how do you, for something so unique, right? And that's the kind of the second key takeaway around all this is like within this massive shift, everyone's experience is completely unique. No one has not been affected. And it's not about comparing, oh, well, someone's situation is better or worse than mine. It's actually just saying, well, what is unique about yours? And how can we support each other throughout all this? And so we kind of missed out in this format, the sense of individuality and that unique sense that everyone's going through their own thing, but each is equally important to discuss and share.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging. Are very in a workshop setting. You're asking people to be vulnerable, and trying. And I love that you kind of did the ground rules as a way to help people feel safe to share that space. But then it is interesting. The beauty and kind of challenge of visual collaboration is that, yeah, if you can see what other people are doing, then that has the ability to kind of influence your own thoughts, right? So that's I imagine, and I'm curious like how your team solved that. Before I jump into the next one, I'm curious, what were these little, you use icons all across this, and I was curious,
Yes.
what are those icons for?
Yeah, so as someone was sharing, I dropped all these little icons. So I dropped some like I think some flames, just like something spicy or like really, so if your teammates share something like fiery that resonates with you, or a heart to show that you like create some empathy with someone, and like a light bulb for like a new idea that you found. And so as people were sharing, I was encouraging the team to drop icons on top of their post-its to just show some love, right? And I think that's the thing about these conversations is like the worst thing in having this conversation is sharing something and then everyone's on mute and no one reacts to what you say. Like if you're vulnerable, right, and you're putting yourself out there and sharing something deeply personal, that's the worst situation that we could put our teammates in. Like we need to react to it. We need to acknowledge what they've just shared, and just say, hey, yes, I feel you, I feel that pain, or that really resonates with me, or thank you so much for sharing. So, I think those types of acknowledgements, doing that remote is hard, because of Zoom and all that. But, these icons are kind of like a nice way of just like, hey, I heard that, or yeah, that resonates with me.
Yeah, the visual, and I love that the icon. It's a great tip for the icons, like a visual recognition of I hear you and I understand, and I'm going through what you're going through and I get it. So that's great. So you just you kind of key learnings were that there was a lot of social herding, a lot of kind of influencing of one another's ideas in a way. So how did that carry into number 3? So the next evolution. We still have a mall, which is
So
awesome.
Amal is back. And the idea was that we kind of broke it out again and said, okay, well, maybe we could do some like personal reflection, and make this separate, like a separate activity that you would do, but then you would bring it back to your team and share out your profiles all together. And so we built out these individual profiles again, but allowed for more personal reflection. And so, similar to the last time, you have these like maps that you would map yourself to. And then on the right side, one of the things that we wanted to do in the green was, ask some self-reflection questions for each area. But the green boxes represent things that we heard from everyone in the research. And the hypothesis here was that we wanted to normalize that everyone's going through something and that everyone's going through very challenging things. And, I saw something in the chat. Someone just said that, you feel like you're going through this alone, and I think that was the idea was like, we wanted to make sure that people felt like that they're not alone. Like everyone's going through something. And it's more about creating that environment where people feel like they can actually share what they're going through so that we can support each other. And so like the green boxes was like, hey, here's some thought starters on what other people are saying. It's not just also challenges, it's also what you appreciate as well, right? So, what I value about working from home, I get to see my kids more, or what I find challenging is I find it really hard to turn off and switch off, and I'm working more hours and I feel like I'm burning out. Like those things, those challenges, those are real human challenges in the shift, and those are real things that everyone's going through. So wanted to try to make that normal and say, hey, yes, we're all going through this. Like, let's encourage people to share their own unique experience.
That's great. And why? So I think you said, and you're introducing this kind of new concept where it sounds like a lot of the stuff, but in the previous prototypes were real time collaboration. And now what you're sharing is kind of this asynchronous way of working, but then being able to bring that into if I understand properly, you would bring this into a group session afterwards.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So do some self-reflection, map yourself, almost like a worksheet, and then bring that worksheet to the rest of your team to share out. And I think what we wanted to do is like bake in that own time of just like, hey, like give people space and give people time to just reflect on what they're going through, and try not to rush it. Once you get into that workshop format, whether it's like time constraints or time delimiters, like you're like, okay, let's get to the thing, or, and it's not as easy as that. So, we're toying around with that idea and testing that idea. I think, what we learned here is like, yes, there's value in self-reflection. There's value in, sharing not just like where you sit. I think those graphs and the charts make it seem very like geometric. It's like geometry, it's like a mathematical plane. That's not what's important. What's important is like what you choose to share with each other. So I think that's the valuable piece of like valuable insight that we got from this was like the self-reflection and like that choice of like what I choose to share with my team is really important, because that also allows people to still have that control that we talked about in that first prototype.
Great. And then your final evolution before the one, and everything's always a work in progress, right? But it's
yes, everything.
And the next prototype you guys did have was, and I love this Team Anywhere workshop. So tell us, how did it evolve from this Team Anywhere profile to this actual workshop environment?
So we had kind of a forcing function, which was a testing session with the highest levels of leadership at Atlassian. So, it's called Executive Ops, and it's like our two founders, Mike Cannon Brooks, Scott Farquhar, and like all the heads of product and, all the heads of technology coming together to, like run these types of sessions. And we had set up a session beforehand to run something with them. And so we essentially had that forcing function, identified some of those learnings, and wanted to test out a new format that kind of like brought some of these aspects together. We also had a very short time box to work within. So it's only like a 20-minute testing session with them. So we had to make some decisions on what was important. And so what we went with here was essentially giving everyone their own personal space. So you see like Amy has her own area. She maps herself over time, giving people that choice and like that sense of individuality. But then most of the testing session with exec ops was about the discussion. What was powerful about the discussion, the feedback that we got from these leaders was like, the only feedback was that they wanted to do this for a longer period of time. They're disappointed that they didn't get to do it for an hour or like 2 hours. And I think that kind of showed if, some of our most time poor like leadership actually wanted to do this for longer, it's actually a pretty good signal for us that there's value in that conversation, that in the busy day-to-day that we have, that we're not effectively creating enough time and space for us to share with one another and have these types of conversations that are so important to understanding where we're coming from, what we're going through now, and how we can support each other. So, that was the light bulb for us, was like, oh, that's really powerful that, we're getting that signal from exec ops, like, hey, we need to create more time and space. We can't just force this into like a small time box. We actually need to, carve out enough of that time for this to truly be effective and valuable for our teams.
Right. And I think going back to what something you touched on earlier, that is that Mural as a platform becomes a space for people to kind of navigate and kind of process that, but then it was really like the richness of the discussion around this for the executives was the big highlight for you, and also of course for the executives who needed that space and time. So I think that's an important thing to think. Like a tool is it's a tool or a platform or software is helping get towards that outcome, but creating this visual map helps get there.
Mm.
So now you have these 4 iterations, and so now we have the play ready to share. And for those of you on the call, you'll get this template from Eugene and the Atlassian team after this session, and we'll be happy to share the link. But what, and after these 4 iterations, and you did this in a really short time span. I mean, what's this? Talk us through this final, what you finally produced to share as a play.
Yeah, so we wanted to get something in the hands of our teams pretty quickly. So once we were able to understand the research that was coming out of our research team, and be able to land on these insights, and we had like the initial idea of like, hey, well, maybe how might we like support our teams through all this? It took us about 4 weeks to like rapidly, prototype the first version, but like continuously like test and iterate. So it was a pretty it was a roller coaster of those 4 weeks, getting to something that we felt confident in. And we're able to, through a lot of these testing sessions, gather those learnings, run enough sessions and say, you know what, we actually feel like this is good enough for our teams to use. And then once enough of those teams had used it, we'd actually felt like, yeah, maybe this is something that we could actually share. So this is the work-life impact play. It has everything you need to run this play. It's also on the Atlassian Team Playbook, if you want to check it out there as well. But it's all contained within this mural. And I think I won't go through the full template here. I'll go through like the top 3 things that I'd highlight. I think number 1, for this template, like setting the stage, especially when you're asking participants in your team to be more vulnerable and to actually like share somewhat really personal information if they choose to, is to really be clear on the purpose, like why are we here, and provide those like guardrails for how you're encouraging the team to interact with each other in that space, right? So right here, right off the bat, we've got the purpose, which is all about building empathy and identifying how we can support each other through all this change. But then the workshop roles are an expression of vulnerability in and of themselves. So, as a facilitator, I would say, like these roles are really in place to make sure we have as effective a time as possible. But the number one thing I want to acknowledge is that everyone's experience is unique, right? No one is not impacted in a major way based on what we've just gone through. Like, everyone's going through these massive impacts. So I want to acknowledge that at the beginning and actually just say, let's appreciate that everyone's experience is unique. And you encourage them to share, and you encourage them to assume positive intent, and that, there's no right or wrong in this space, right? One of the rules we had early on was like, there will be no negative consequences, but that's not actually something that we can promise to people. Is like, especially, if this goes, even within Atlassian, but outside of Atlassian, this could actually be used in different ways. One of the things that we put into the play, if you check out the website, is what we call a safety check. So as preparation for this play, we're not actually encouraging all teams to run this play. So you can do an anonymous poll in Slack and say, hey, team, thinking about running this play, this is what this play is all about. It's about building empathy and understanding. I want to do a quick safety check. And you do an anonymous poll and say, how comfortable do you feel running this play? Are you like a 1, like very low comfort, or a 5, and that's like high comfort and high desire? And you're asking your team to essentially choose to run this play or not. And so we encourage teams to run the safety check before you do it, to get a sense of where your team is at. Because if you're not comfortable at all, and you have team members who are 1s, getting into this time and space together like will not be a successful result, right? Teams should actually feel comfortable. They should feel safe to be able to share with each other this information, or else, like you're not going to get value out of it. So Yeah, so that's something that we encourage up front. So I think that's number one thing, is like setting the stage, making your team is safe and also has the right encouragement to interact in this way. The second thing is, yeah, like keeping things personal and making it personal. We've got these like, add profile picture here, but, including faces and, people's photos here, make it feel like your own, and giving people that encouragement to do that personal reflection. So we've got these like thought starters here is like, what do I need to succeed? What would I like to share? And then something I find difficult. And so when I run this play, I essentially do the first half of this play to allow people to just reflect on their own. There's no conversation yet. Like, you're just reflecting on yourself and how you're going through the change, and writing different post-its to answer these prompts. And then the second half is really about sharing. So like really just like giving people their own time and space to think about it and reflect deeply. The third thing I like to call out is like after this like really rich discussion, as a facilitator, and like likely in any other workshop, what you're doing is trying to get to a result. You're trying to get to action. Who is going to do what by when? What can we take out of this? Who's going to do the next step? Like, how do we move this forward? What I'd encourage facilitators, if you're trying this with your team, is to not necessarily have that mindset. And if you're having a rich conversation, like, be okay with just like having the conversation versus forcing, jumping to actions. So if you don't get to actions, I think that's perfectly fine. You can kind of just like, like have that rich conversation, maybe set up a follow-up to go through the actions.
Great. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And we have people in the audience eager to get their hands on this template as well. And in the last couple minutes before our Q&A, I'm curious about what were some of the key learnings that you and your team had. You said you rapidly tested and prototyped in 4 weeks, which is awesome, to be able to move and test so quickly. So what were some of those key learnings for you guys?
Yeah, I think these are just good takeaways for prototyping in general. So if you're, creating new templates or new plays for your team, I think one of the benefits of working on Mural was that we were able to, really rapidly like co-design. We were able to test these plays together and be able to iterate very quickly. So be able to debrief with each other, unpack the learnings, like what insights do we observe, how are people behaving, right on the Mural itself, and be able to use that feedback to be able to rapidly change the prototype. So, and we were able to go through a lot of different iterations in that way. I think number two is like once we actually landed on a solution, we're able to scale it very quickly and get it in the hands of lots of different teams. I think that's all possible through these types of digital tools like Mural. But be able to get to that place where you do have confidence, you're able to feel like you have solve that initial problem that you set out to solve, and be able to equip teams with those tools. And third is really creating enough space to explore like different potential ideas and solutions. So not just jumping to that first you have on how that tool or that template could actually look, but actually destroy, like get rid of, or very liberally kill off some of those ideas that you had at the beginning as you're learning new things. So working within Mural, like you're not tied to anything, like nothing's precious, like everything can be changed very easily. So it allows this mindset of like being able to throw away your ideas, being able to test a lot of different competing potential solutions without feeling too married to one or the other, and ultimately just moving forward and having confidence in the right solution.
Nice. That's great. And that is great for prototyping in general, right? But especially just knowing that having that space to connect and collaborate, especially in a global team, was awesome. And so what were some, coming out of the session, some of the results that you talked about, like being able to have more space for discussion, maybe people realizing that, and I guess like what was success for your team?
Yeah, success for our team was, like, one way we could have looked at it, I guess, was more of like a scale, so how many people around the world are using this play, or how many people have come to the website. That's less important for us, as a team. I think the real impact that we wanted to create was, are we able to create these different types of interactions where empathy and like shared understanding and like connection were able to take place.
Mhm.
And so we run a lot of feedback surveys after these plays with our teams on whether it was an effective use of time to be able to get to the outcome. I think that's what matters to us. And the feedback internally has been resoundingly positive. I think the number one way that we can improve the play that teams say is that they just want more time.
Mhm.
It's like they say, yeah, hey, we spent 90 minutes as a team. We're constantly on Zooms all day. We have more meetings than we actually need, but we would have actually liked to spend more time on this. And I think
Mhm.
that's a testament to, I guess, the value of being able to do this, but also a signal that our teams don't have enough time and space to create that connection with each other, to be honest with each other, and to share where we're all coming from and how we're being affected by what's happening around us. So, I think that's amazing feedback, and we're seeing a lot of our leadership teams internally use it and then realize, oh, we need to be running it with more of our teams, and we kind of see this cascading effect. So, would love to measure the success of this over the long term, not just thinking about like, oh, what's happened in the last couple of months since we launched it. But yeah, are we able to build up those new skills, those new competencies of empathy and resiliency, and being able to adapt to each other and being able to better support each other through these constantly changing times?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking too, you mentioned being able to measure that impact over time. And of course, I imagine as the months go on with the pandemic and different uh, dynamics changing in the teams, what's next for you as a coach and for the R&D team thinking about addressing challenges through prototyping or through visual collaboration?
Mm. Yeah, we've got so much work to do. And I think that's definitely true for us as coaches within Atlassian, but also for us as a community of practitioners who are trying to help drive improvement on our team. So whether you're a manager or just an individual contributor on your team, I think all of us have a lot of room for improvement ourselves, and especially in the shift to remote working. Atlassian, I mentioned it earlier, like made this promise to its employees that we'll never have to work from the office again. So it's called
Mhm.
like Team Anywhere. So as part of Team Anywhere, how do we continue to help our teams adapt and take on these new tools, but build up these new skills and competencies for the future, right? And I think that's the work that I'm most excited about, is being able to build out, yes, the digital toolkit or the remote toolkit, but also work with teams to be able to build up those new skills. So yeah, I think whether it's like new plays, new tools, and also ways to build up those new competencies are things I'm super excited about, and can't wait to see what else comes out from the community as well outside of Atlassian.
That's great. Thank you. And I guess my one more question, I'm curious about like something that sparked my mind because you're talking about new competencies and these new skills and needs. And I know Mural is really a mechanism to help with certain new competencies, but where do you see uh, platforms like Mural in terms of collaboration or working visually? Where in the mix does that come for you in the
Mm.
teams?
I think when we think about effective collaboration, one of the first building blocks is just being able to communicate with each other. And I think knowing that there are a lot of different learning styles and communication styles, something like Mural is kind of the thing that allows us to even the playing field. I think just hopping onto a Zoom meeting, you're biased towards people, or you're creating an uneven balance that suits the needs of people who are able to talk more
Mhm.
than others, and communicate verbally better than others. And I think someone who's more visual and kinesthetic like me, I think Mural is like that perfect place where I can actually make sense of what's happening. I am not a great listener. I have to actively work at my listening, and something like Mural, where it's visual and allows you to make connections and move things around, and have that sense of connection to it, like that makes it more visceral, and that makes me be able to participate and collaborate with my teammates. So something like that, I think, is really essential in that future that we just talked about.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I know you and your team are going to have a lot of work ahead of you to develop those competencies. And of course, at Mural, we're here to help you succeed with your teams. So I appreciate you sharing your story so much. And I know we have tons of questions from our audience here, especially from, this is an important one from Gino. Says, hi. That is an important question. How do we become as cool as Eugene? Um, so let's go through and answer some of these. And I think what I'll do, Eugene, is defer to you if there are specific
Okay.
questions that well, I'm happy to tag in and answer some of those as well. Um, Maybe let's start with in terms of let's start with Gabriel Freeman in the challenges section. So how do you get context to get rolling in a company built around in-person tribal knowledge?
How do you get context to get rolling? Yeah, without understanding the context of that question, I'm assuming Gabriel's coming from a really large organization that has, I guess, pockets of that tribal knowledge. I think especially within the remote context, it's really hard to understand what's happening in those pockets of teams. I can only speak to a few things that Atlassian uses, but we do use like organization-wide, team surveys and things like that. And I think those are only as good as your ability to act on them. So, if teams feel like nothing's going to change, if they give input into those surveys, then yeah, like the input isn't going to be that rich or valuable or honest or open. So, I think if you have things like that, then I would marry those with actually seeking out those people, seeking out those pockets, whether it's interviews or workshops. We definitely have a few formats that we use to be able to, within a 90-minute period, not just help teams go through like things like a retro, but be able to collect happening across the organization, be able to ladder those up to maybe some of those like system level challenges that we're kind of all facing, all of our teams are facing, and be able to try to do something about it. So, I that's such a juicy question. I can't go too deep into it, but hopefully that provides some thoughts there, Gabriel.
Yeah, I think this actually ties really nicely a to a question. I mean, thinking about plays at Atlassian, because Christina was wondering the plays that you're talking about, and maybe like getting some of that knowledge or sharing some of that information. It might be vulnerable for some people. So I don't know if you have the playbook memorized, but are there a couple of plays that you can think about where if a team said we're not ready to do that kind of this play yet, but maybe something a little bit at surface level before you dive down deeper?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. The plays that we usually direct those teams towards, number one, I usually have a follow conversation with that whoever's like leading that team, just to understand, I guess, what that context of the team is. But the plays that I might direct them to is number one, like just a retrospective. I'm not sure if the team is regularly doing retrospectives, but that's a really good place to start. Teams have control over what they share, how they share it. And I think the most important thing is to ensure that, yeah, you're doing them consistently, but you're able to actually build some momentum, and you really start small and helping to identify those areas of improvement that you can actually do, that you have influence over. So I think that's a juicy play to start with if you don't do that already. The second is more of like Atlassian proprietary play called the Health Monitor. And it's essentially a play where, similar to a retro, you get together as a team and assess yourself against these 9 different attributes of a healthy team, and have a conversation about it. And so that can, help dip your toe in the water. People don't feel safe, like they may not be as honest as they might, but it at least gives you kind of that easy way to interact with it, and an easy play to run as well.
Nice, thanks. And we can help find the retrospective play for the audience as well. I like this question from Rita about facilitation. So it sounds like, if I understand correctly, you facilitated a lot of these workshops and sessions with these teams. Is that right?
Yes.
So do you recommend for a team who wants to run this play that they do the same thing, get a facilitator, an external facilitator, or do you think it's okay for somebody who's on the team to do it, and why?
Yeah, we strongly encourage teams to find an external facilitator. This can be someone adjacent to your team. This can be someone outside of your team entirely. I think what's powerful there is that everyone can fully participate. And oftentimes, especially for managers or leaders, if managers and leaders are facilitating all the plays and all the interactions of a team, it can lead to some uneven power dynamics within the team. There's some certain biases that managers and leaders exhibit when facilitating that may not lead to healthy outcomes, right? And so if you're looking for, I guess, this ability to build empathy and understanding, I think what's essential is that managers acknowledge their role on teams and be able to honestly share, express vulnerability, and then also, help others like create empathy with them. And that kind of helps build trust and safety over time. So I would recommend finding a buddy. Maybe you can do swaps. Hey, I'll run this if you run for me,
Mm.
kind of attack it that way. But starting small and doing your best to yeah, like if you can't find an external facilitator, then maybe make it an option for someone else. Hey, does anyone on this team want to grow as a facilitator or want to practice as a facilitator? Like, I would encourage managers to not necessarily assume that you have to be the one who should be facilitating all these plays.
Nice. That's a great tip, and I 100% recommend that as well. Because to your point, the bias and everything is a challenging one to address. Um, Reese was wondering if how are you capturing feedback? So you mentioned you are sending out surveys or like a feedback mechanism for each prototype. What are the kind of things that you are evaluating, and how are you doing that?
Mm. So a few different ways that we capture feedback. Number one, at the end of each play, I make sure to carve out like 3 minutes at the very end to do essentially like a fist of five like feedback round. So I'll say it's like, okay, we're gonna do a fist of five. Everyone like raise your fists, and on a scale of like 1 to 5, like how valuable was this time that we just had right now? Like how valuable was the session? And I'll count down, and everyone will show like, oh, it was really valuable for me, or I didn't get much value out of it. So I do that after every session that I personally facilitate. Then I screenshot that and then kind of roll those numbers up all together to see how much value is being created. And then second thing I do is issue a feedback survey. It takes like 2 minutes. Ask like 2 or 3 basic questions, but I try to get a good read on all the teams that we run it with across the organization. And the third way is that we have a open Slack channel called Work Life Impact, and you're able to go to the Slack channel and say, "Hey, this is a problem I encountered," or "This is what worked for us." And a lot of other people are, building up their own experience with Work Life Impact, and so they run it completely differently and are sharing those juicy nuggets with other facilitators who are super interested in it as well. So try to get that community of practice going, of people who are trying it out in their different pockets, and connect those people together.
Nice. All right. Are there any, maybe we have time for one more question, Eugene? I'll let you pick this one. Is there one specifically that you wanted to pick out and think about and answer?
Yeah, I guess a lot of these questions have been covered.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about Rita's question. So are people willing to share so personal things? And I think, Rita, that's such a big question, and it's a question that I'd encourage you to seek to understand within your own team and your own organization. Is like, what is that ability for us to share personal information? Maybe that's an experiment that you could run with your own team, something that you could test, and taking that kind of like experimentation mindset, I think will help expose new learnings, like different things that you may not have known about your own team or your own organization, but is only able to be learned once you try it. So I can't say what that looks like for you. I can only imagine, I guess, like where that question is coming from. But that would be my encouragement for anyone who's like wondering whether something like this could work, is to try it out and see, run a safety check, try to run the play, and see what you learn from that and what type of outcome it yields.
Hmm. Awesome. Let me see. I actually think we do have time for one more question. So I actually want to get to Dylan's question, which was, have there been requests for follow-up templates to further the conversation around work life? So what I think in terms of looking ahead, you're talking about new competencies and new concepts. Is there another play that's brewing, if you can share?
Not necessarily a play that's focused on this topic, but we are starting to move to different challenge areas at Atlassian. So I think the first one was like, how do we just create stronger empathy and understanding on teams? Feel pretty confident that we're getting to the outcome that we set out to at the beginning. And so now we're kind of moving on to other problem areas. The things that we're concerned about right now is this potential innovation gap, this lack of time and space and mindset to do deep, unstructured, complex problem solving. So that's kind of the next area that we're tackling is, in a remote driven world where you're constantly on Zooms and you have time pressure to deliver, how do you still carve out that space for teams to say, you know what, let's just deeply understand a problem. Let's try not to jump straight to the solution or what we think the solution might be. Let's just understand the problem deeper and be okay with maybe the different perspectives and opinions that are shared. But so how do you do that in a safe way on a team? And how do you do that so that you can actually get to not just like more innovative ideas, but better solutions for our customers and people who actually use our software every day?
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I'm gonna throw a little confetti over here to celebrate. Eugene, thank you for joining us. It's really great to hear how you and your team are able to work quickly and to really scale this play across Atlassian and making Mural part of it. We really appreciate it. And this is just one of our awesome sessions that we have for Mural Imagine. So we want to invite our audience, if you want to keep learning, keep gathering inspiration for ways to use Mural in your work, then join us December 1st, where we're going to hear about making meaning in a paperless world with Zapier, Richard from Zapier. And if you want to register, we'll put the link into the chat for you to register for all of our Mural Imagine sessions. And then what we'll do in addition to that is for this session, we will share the recording with you for this session and the Mural template that Eugene walked us through today so that you can start using this Mural template and this play in your own work. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have an awesome day.